On the top floor of an abandoned psychiatric ward in Athens, Ohio, there is a stain on a concrete floor in the shape of a human body. It has been there since 1979. Cleaning crews tried bleach, they tried industrial solvents, they tried acidic compounds so harsh they damaged the concrete itself. The stain would not come off. It will never come off. Because the woman who made it lay dead and undiscovered in that room for 42 days, while her body slowly decomposed into the floor beneath her. Her name was Margaret Schilling, and the asylum that was supposed to protect her did not even notice she was gone. But Margaret Schilling's stain is only the beginning of what this asylum left behind. Behind these walls, a doctor visited once a year carrying an ice pick and a portable electroshock machine. He would perform over 20 brain surgeries in a single day. A convicted rapist with 24 separate personalities became the first person in American history to be found not guilty by reason of insanity. And in 3 cemeteries scattered across the hillside, nearly 2,000 patients lie buried beneath stones marked with nothing but a number. If you are the kind of person who needs to know what happened inside places like this, subscribe. We are documenting every one of America's forgotten asylums, and the stories only get darker from here. To understand how a place designed to heal could lose a patient inside its own walls, you have to go back to when this building was raised from the earth itself. In 1867, the Ohio legislature appointed a commission to find a suitable location for a new asylum to serve the southeastern part of the state. They chose a hilltop overlooking the Hocking River in Athens, a quiet college town tucked into the Appalachian foothills. The architect was Levi Scofield, the same man who would later design the Ohio State Reformatory. The grounds were laid out by Herman Herlin, a student of Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect behind Central Park in New York City. This was not going to be some grim warehouse for the unwanted. This was going to be a model of compassionate care. The design followed the principles of Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride, a Philadelphia physician who believed that architecture itself could cure mental illness. Kirkbride's philosophy was simple: give patients sunlight, fresh air, open space, and meaningful work. The building was arranged in a bat-wing floor plan, stretching 853 feet long and 60 feet wide. The least disturbed patients were housed near the center, where they could socialize and move freely. The most severe cases were placed at the far ends of each wing, away from the exits. The campus would eventually grow to over 1,000 acres. There were orchards, greenhouses, a dairy farm, livestock pastures, gardens, even decorative lakes and waterfalls. Patients milked cows, tended crops, and mended shirts as part of their therapy. From the outside, it looked less like a hospital and more like a New England college campus. The Athens Lunatic Asylum officially opened on January 9, 1874, with 200 patients and genuine optimism that it could heal the broken minds of southeastern Ohio. But the building that was supposed to save people was already too big for its own promise. Kirkbride had recommended housing no more than 250 patients in a facility of this size. The Athens Asylum had room for 572. From the day it opened, it was designed to hold more people than one building should, and the population just kept growing. By the early 1900s, the patient count had swelled from 200 to nearly 2,000. That is more than 3 times the building's intended capacity. Wards built for 20 patients now held 60. Hallways became sleeping quarters. Patients shared beds in shifts. The staff was stretched so thin that entire wings went unsupervised for hours at a time. The beautiful grounds still existed, but inside the building, the vision of moral treatment had collapsed under the sheer weight of human bodies. And the people being sent here were not always who you would expect. The first patient admitted to Athens on that opening day in 1874 was a 14-year-old girl suffering from epilepsy. Her parents believed she was possessed by a demon. That was enough to lock her away. The asylum's own records from 1876 reveal what the state of Ohio considered grounds for commitment. For men, the single most common cause of what they called insanity was listed as masturbation. The second was alcohol. For women, the leading causes were listed as puerperal condition, which referred to complications from childbirth, change of life, which referred to menopause, and menstrual derangements. Think about that for a moment. A woman going through menopause in the 19th century in Ohio could be committed to a psychiatric institution against her will. Civil War veterans suffering from what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder were housed alongside violent criminals. Children were locked in the same wards as adults. Rebellious teenagers were dropped off by frustrated parents who wanted them taught a lesson. Elderly relatives that families could no longer care for were simply abandoned at the front door. Homeless men used the asylum as temporary shelter during harsh Appalachian winters. The asylum was never just a hospital. It was a dumping ground for anyone that society did not know what to do with. But the treatments were even worse than the reasons for being there. Hydrotherapy involved wrapping patients in wet sheets for hours, or submerging them in baths of ice-cold water as a form of shock treatment. Electroshock therapy sent electrical currents through the brain to induce seizures. Restraints were used so frequently that some patients spent years strapped to beds or locked inside cages. Psychotropic drugs were administered in experimental doses with little understanding of their long-term effects. And then there were the lobotomies. During the 1950s, a man named Dr. Walter Freeman visited the Athens Asylum on an annual basis. Freeman was not a surgeon, he was a neurologist, but he had developed a procedure he believed could cure mental illness in a matter of minutes. He called it the transorbital lobotomy. The process involved taking a thin metal instrument shaped like an ice pick, inserting it through the patient's eye socket, and using a mallet to tap it through the thin bone at the top of the socket into the frontal lobe of the brain. Then he would sweep the instrument from side to side, severing the neural connections he believed were responsible for emotional disturbance. Freeman did not use a traditional operating room. He did not even require one. He carried a portable electroshock machine that he used to render patients unconscious, and he performed the procedure in offices, examination rooms, wherever there was a flat surface and enough light to see. He traveled from asylum to asylum across America in a van, carrying his instruments with him, demonstrating his technique to hospital staff who watched in fascination and horror. His own daughter once jokingly called him the Henry Ford of lobotomy. He loved the comparison. One former staff physician at Athens named Dr. Wolfhard Baumgartel later recalled watching Freeman operate during one of his visits. Baumgartel was a young doctor at the time, fresh from Germany and barely fluent in English. He described how patients were brought in one after another, like an assembly line. One would go out, the next would come in, have the procedure done, and then be wheeled away. There were no pauses, no consultations between cases. Baumgartel remembered that Freeman was relaxed, he was calm, he was extremely self-confident, he made it look easy. This was the same man who had lobotomized Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy, leaving her permanently incapacitated at the age of 23. The procedure had been arranged by her father without telling the rest of the family. At Athens, Freeman performed over 200 lobotomies. On some visits, he completed more than 20 in a single day. Between 2 and 5% of his patients died from the procedure. Hospital officials publicly claimed that many of the surviving patients were cured and allowed to return home. But the reality was far grimmer. Many lobotomy patients lost their ability to function independently. They could not hold conversations. They could not control their emotions. They had to be retaught how to use the toilet. Freeman himself coined the term surgically induced childhood to describe the outcome. That was his definition of success. Across the country, Freeman personally performed as many as 4,000 lobotomies before he was finally banned from operating in 1967. The damage he left behind at Athens was just one small chapter in a career built on cutting into brains he barely understood. But the most disturbing chapter in Athens history did not happen in an operating room. It happened in a room that nobody remembered existed. On December 1st, 1978, a 53-year-old patient named Margaret Schilling failed to appear for dinner. Schilling was a long-term resident of the asylum's continued care unit. She had no serious behavioral problems. She was considered a model patient. Staff described her as quiet and cooperative. In the weeks before her disappearance, nurses noticed she had become unusually withdrawn. She stopped speaking. She stopped reacting to words. It was as if she had gone silent. When Schilling did not show up for the evening meal, staff initiated what they called a code brown. Orderlies searched the active wards. They checked the grounds. They combed the surrounding woods because patients sometimes wandered off into the Appalachian forest. Nothing. The next day, the police were called in. They organized a grid search of the entire campus, all 78 buildings spread across 1,000 acres. They searched the attics, the basements, the abandoned wings. They searched in daylight with full teams. They found nothing. After 2 weeks, the search was effectively abandoned. Margaret Schilling remained missing for 42 days. On January the 12th, 1979, a maintenance worker was moving boxes on the top floor of Ward N20, an abandoned section of the asylum that had once housed extremely infectious patients. The ward was sealed off from the rest of the building, accessible only through a narrow stairway and completely disconnected from the heating system. In the dead of an Ohio winter, the room was freezing. The worker found Margaret Schilling lying on the concrete floor near a window. She was dead. She was naked. Her clothes were folded neatly beside her body. The official cause of death was heart failure, likely brought on by prolonged exposure to the bitter cold in that unheated room. No one could explain how she had gotten there. No one could explain why she had undressed. No one could explain why she had folded her clothes with such care before lying down to die. And then the cleanup crew discovered something that would haunt the Athens campus for decades. When they removed Margaret Schilling's body from the concrete floor, they found a stain. Not a blood stain, but an outline. The shape of her entire body was etched into the concrete, a ghostly silhouette in chalky white, ringed by a darker border. Workers scrubbed the floor with every industrial cleaner they had. The stain would not come off. In 2007, forensic scientists from Ohio University analyzed the mark. They determined it was caused by a process called adiposia, the breakdown of body fat into a waxy, soap-like substance during decomposition. The fatty acids from Schilling's decomposing body had chemically altered the concrete. The acidic cleaners the maintenance crews used in attempts to remove the stain had actually sealed it deeper into the floor, making it permanent. Margaret Schilling's outline remains on that concrete floor to this day. The room is kept locked. Ohio University does not offer public access. The stain is there, a permanent indictment of the institution that was supposed to care for her. Margaret Schilling was not the last patient to make Athens infamous. In 1977, a man named Billy Milligan was sent to the Athens Asylum after one of the most sensational criminal cases in American history. Milligan had been arrested in Columbus for kidnapping, robbing, and raping 3 female students at Ohio State University. During his psychiatric evaluation, doctors diagnosed him with multiple personality disorder. They eventually identified 24 distinct personalities living inside his mind, including an Englishman skilled in science, a Yugoslav communist who committed the robberies, a 19-year-old woman who had committed the rapes, a 3-year-old girl, and an 8-year-old boy. Milligan's attorneys argued that his alternate personalities had committed the crimes without Milligan himself being aware of it. In a landmark decision, Billy Milligan became the first person in American history to be acquitted of a major crime using the insanity defense based on multiple personality disorder. He was committed to the Athens Asylum for treatment rather than sent to prison. His case drew international attention. Daniel Keyes, the author of Flowers for Algernon and a creative writing professor at Ohio University, interviewed Milligan extensively during his time at Athens and wrote a best-selling book called The Minds of Billy Milligan. Decades later, Netflix produced a 4-part documentary series about his life. Milligan was eventually deemed no longer a danger to society and was released from the Ohio mental health system in 1988. He died of cancer in 2014. Milligan eventually left Athens alive. Most patients were not that fortunate. Scattered across the hillside surrounding the asylum are 3 cemeteries containing the remains of nearly 2,000 former patients. For most of the asylum's history, the dead were buried beneath small white stones carved with nothing but a number. No name, no date of birth, no indication of who they had been before this place swallowed them whole. The hospital kept a register connecting each number to a patient's identity, but record keeping was inconsistent. Only one register survives today, containing approximately 1,700 names out of the more than 2,000 burials. The records for the first 63 patients buried there have been lost entirely. Those people are truly gone. Numbers without names, buried on a hillside in southeastern Ohio, with no one left alive who remembers they existed. Men and women were numbered separately. The last patient burials occurred in 1972, ending with female number 847 and male number 1117. Among the dead are over 80 Civil War veterans, men who survived the bloodiest conflict in American history only to die forgotten inside an asylum. In 2000, the Athens chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness began working to restore the cemeteries. Volunteers cleared overgrown brush. Researchers dug through surviving hospital records trying to match numbers to names. They erected memorial markers and began holding annual ceremonies to honor the dead. One elderly woman traveled to Athens that year to visit the newly identified grave of her mother, a patient named Viola Rapp, who had died and been buried under a number decades earlier. It was the first time the daughter had been able to stand at her mother's grave. The asylum finally closed in 1993, but what replaced it might be stranger than what came before. Ohio University acquired the property through a land swap with the State Department of Mental Health. They renamed the campus The Ridges, a name chosen through a public contest in 1984 to distance the property from its asylum identity. And then they began converting the buildings into something no one from the asylum era could have imagined. The Kennedy Museum of Art now occupies the main administration building of the former asylum. Students attend lectures in rooms where patients once slept 3 to a bed. Music departments rehearse in spaces where electroshock machines once hummed. Geology labs operate in wings where violent patients were once restrained behind metal doors. A dairy barn where patients once milked cows as part of their therapy has been converted into a non-profit arts center that hosts local cultural events. Every single building on the campus has been renovated and repurposed, except one. Cottage B, one of the original 7 cottages built to house tuberculosis patients, still stands abandoned. Its walls and ceiling are packed with asbestos. The asylum had housed tuberculosis patients in this cottage because administrators believed the hilltop elevation would provide fresh air beneficial to diseased lungs. The cruel irony is almost too perfect. A building designed to help people with damaged lungs was itself lined with a material that destroys them. The cemeteries remain under the maintenance of the Ohio Department of Mental Health. Numbered stones still stand in rows on the hillside. The nature trail that winds past them is popular with joggers and dog walkers who pass the graves without a second glance. Every October, thousands of students and visitors descend on Athens for Halloween celebrations, and the old asylum buildings become the backdrop for ghost tours and paranormal investigations. And on the top floor of Ward N20, behind a locked door that Ohio University rarely opens, the outline of Margaret Schilling remains exactly where she left it. The concrete remembers what the institution tried to forget. A woman who disappeared inside the building that was supposed to keep her safe. A body that lay decomposing for 6 weeks while the world moved on without her. A stain that refused to be erased, no matter how hard they scrubbed. Some stories leave marks you can see. Athens left one you can touch. Subscribe if you want to see more, and let us know in the comments. Should Ohio University open Margaret Schilling's room to the public? Or is some history better left behind a locked door?